And so now we continue with part 6 of the Grail series, but this is B. This is part B because we are reading on a particular topic, and that is the Artherian Grail Mysteries. So anyone coming upon this video really needs to start with the complete beginning of the whole Grail series. But this is part B. This is part 6B. And so we continue. Before we continue, some definitions are in order for the Grail archetypes which Thoth assigns to some of these characters. Grail Guardian, one who maintains the protection and sustainment of the Grail mystery. Grail Facilitator, one who works to advance the Grail mystery in some form within the world. Solar Orchestrator, one who is authorized by the solar hierarchy within the universal hierarchy to perpetuate and manage the mandate of the solar ray of illumined consciousness within the planetary program of return to the unified field of perpetual light. Galahad. As you will recall, Galahad was the great-grandson of Merlin, the product of Mirith, having incarnated again through the product of his own seed. He had then been born as Bran, or Ban, later to become known as Galahad. Corinne Helene, in her book Mysteries of the Holy Grail, writes with inspiration concerning a certain abbey mural. She does not give the identity or location of this mural in which the infant Galahad is depicted. Clasping his hands together, gazing in rapt adoration at something invisible to those around him, while an expression of bliss overspreads his child's countenance. The nuns who have him in charge gaze upon him in awe, for they know that he sees what they cannot see, and he hears what they cannot hear, of sights and sounds of angelic worlds. And now from my book, manuscript, the Merlin Chronicles, this small quote: it was through Galahad that much of the original plan was completed. For him, just one moment, I'm going to pause for a drink of water. Apologies, I'm going to read that again. It was through Galahad that much of the original plan was completed. For in him was the blood of Galatane, and it was he who would redeem the Holy Grail for the spiritual rebirth of a future age. That's a quote from my Merlin's Chronicles, and now I continue. Thoth reveals to us that through Galahad, the secret Grail Church of the Johannine was continued at a point in time when it was perilously close to demise. Galahad assumed a Christ-like role through assuming a recapitulation of the new Christic dispensation within his soul. This vibration then sustained the Johannine flame, the innermost chapel divine of the Christic Church, a while longer, due to this service Galahad rendered to the earth. As I have in this text, but I did not make a video on it, the Johannine Church is the true Christic Church. The Petrine Church was a wobble in time. That's not to say we're not putting down St. Peter now. I mean, it had its good qualities, but it was not the intended church. It's kind of like author, it was not the intended one. It was plan 2, plan B. So when we speak of the Johannine flame, we're speaking of the true Christic flame church, the original one. In addition, through Galahad's offspring, a new branch was established within the tree of the Holy Grail blood. This branch of the Holy Tree contained within it the regenerated presence of the Christic host Yeshua, which had been divinely inserted into Galahad's DNA during his transfiguration. This transfiguration is referred to in myth as Galahad's coming into the holy chapel of the Grail, which in truth is the sacred center of the heart. From this revivification lineage, certain key Johannine priests, priestesses, and bishops emerged. And so he was receiving paragenetically, as we've spoken about before, an aspect of DNA that he needed to complete his program. Taliesin, Princess Urala of Tara, Ireland, the great-granddaughter of Gwenhwyfar, gave birth to a son by Danann, who dwelt in the other world. There were those who threatened to kill the child, so Urala had him smuggled to England, where he was raised by a prince named Elphin. The latter subsequently became king. This child was named Taliesin and was a three-latticed soul. In a previous incarnation, one of the three souls of Taliesin had been Indiri, the Danann husband of Princess T. In the Taliesin incarnation, Indiri's soul joined forces with the soul of John the Baptist and one other soul. The soul of John the Baptist had been previously layered with Thoth's soul and one other soul in the entity we know as John the Divine. The soul of John the Baptist also had been one of the 5 latticed souls of Merlin. Although Merlin came before Taliesin, the former lived 300 years. Thus he was still on the earth during a portion of Taliesin's adult life, which means that the soul which was latticed with both of these personages was projecting overlapping simultaneous embodiments as well. This is the entanglement thing. Complex, but it's not important. No, complex, but it is important. You remember all these intricate connections so much as it is to simply recognize the interconnectiveness of all these experiences and how these souls were working with the solar hierarchy for the development of the greater plan by embodying repeatedly in these bloodlines and bringing their paragenetic information to further the cause at various key points in the unfolding sequence of events. Now, granted, most of us around on the planet Earth are not just constantly double incarnating and layering with other souls. This is a type of thing that is generally accomplished in a prevalent way by, illumined souls, those that are up there on the ladder. However, you can, it's not uncommon to have another life going on in the same timeline as the one you have. Probably just one, because your oversoul is having to feed 2 at once, and it would be, it's not that easy, but it can happen and does happen. But the layering thing, that's even more complex. So, we won't go into it, but the whole idea of soul incarnation and what it really means is really, really vast, and nothing like most people simply think, oh, I lived before, or whatever. It's much more complex than that. To continue, Merlin was also a direct relation to Princess T and Indiri, which means he was of the same lineage as Taliesin as well. Merlin's relation to Princess T and Indiri, that's the name, came through his mother, Mary Grace, whose mother, Ulla, was from Ireland. Remember, we related previously that Ulla was also the woman who married King Solomon, which in turn spawned the Solomon lineage that hosted the Solomon Christ, so as a simultaneous incarnation to that of Yeshua, the Nathan Christ, soul embodiment. Now, in these days, when I wrote this text, I was using the Rudolf Steiner term, Solomon Christ and Nathan Christ, because I was aware that Rudolf Steiner did say there were 2 Jesus souls at one time, and then the Solomon died and the Nathan continued. But he put them in 2 separate embodiments that were living like at the same time and knew each other and whatever. Thoth doesn't do that. Thoth puts them in the same body, and the Solomon soul left at the time of baptism. So, these things can get rather confusing. We can think of it as alternate timelines, because I'm certainly not going to buck Rudolf Steiner, but at the same time, this is what I received, and I'm not going to trash that either. So, you can figure it one way or the other, but in a way, it's kind of a small detail, because the essence of it is what's important. We really need to stick to essence. However, I felt at the time I wrote this, and now I feel it as well, that reading through this with you, it's allowing you to feel the essence of it all. You don't have to remember all this stuff. Good grief, I can't remember it. But, just to feel it and bring it into your experiential body. It threads the needle, is what I'm saying. The common soul of Indiri Taliesin was a key figure in the Grail mystery, for like Merlin, this entity was very much a solar orchestrator of Grail lineages in the world. He guided planetary consciousness into the proper flow to produce them. As Indiri, this soul introduced an expanded vision to Jeremiah and Princess T with regard to their true Grail roles, and foresaw the power, the plan of the generations spawned from his union with Princess T. Within the Taliesin embodiment, this soul continued facilitating the remaining pieces of the Grail orchestration in the last stages of its great work. He established several mystery schools in which this knowledge was taught and redeveloped certain healing arts. Taliesin especially worked with those healing arts incorporating the principles of sound harmonics. And now we go to Percival. Percival was brought into the Grail legends by the early scholars in a way that was not entirely factual, as is the case with many of the key Arthurian characters. In the early legends, Percival was depicted as the original Knight of the Grail. Later legends gave Galahad this role instead, since he had a clear lineage stemming from Joseph of Arimathea, and in fact also contained a direct Grail path through Yeshua's son John Martinus. Thus, as we have stated previously, Galahad was doubly related to the Holy Family of the Christ. From Thoth's perspective, it truly was Galahad's role to be seen in the legends as the original Grail Knight. As a genuine historical figure, Percival was actually a warrior monk who was from the Atlantean Hyperborean rooted solar lineage, as was Merlin and Taliesin. Thus, he was more in the role of solar orchestrator and Grail guardian than that of Grail facilitator. Lancelot. According to the Arthurian legends, Lancelot was one of the Knights of the Round Table and the father of Galahad by Elaine. While Elaine was Galahad's mother, the record of Thoth reveals that his father was actually Ion, the grandson of Merlin, as previously related. Since Ion had died of a serpent's bite and had then reincarnated as his own son in the form of Galahad, this effectively left him fatherless on the physical plane. Thus Lancelot fostered the child and called him his son. He later established Galahad as his legal heir as well. So it is easy to see how it may have been thought that Lancelot was his paternal father. Lancelot was unwittingly used as a ploy by the Anti-Grail usurpers to separate Arthur from Guinevere by accusing the queen of infidelity with Lancelot. This became the fodder for what the Arthurian Grail legends built upon in order to develop a medieval romance that was worth the reading to the people of the time. Despite the historical distortions, these legends nonetheless cleverly disguised the Grail consciousness principles in the storyline to form a unique form of initiatic codex of sorts. Isolde, and Tristan. A Celtic myth inserted these figures as star-crossed lovers in a web of deceit and intrigue. In later times, this story became attached to the Arthurian legend. The record of Thoth holds the memory of the true living beings who went by these names, which is quite different from the legend that encompasses them now. In truth, the Princess Isolde, I can't say that name, sorry, was of the third generation of Millicents in Ireland, who migrated from Spain. Although she lived long before the time of the Arthurian kingdom, she played a key role in the Grail lineage. Tristan was a prince of the Orkneys, from the Orkneys, off the coast of Scotland, who journeyed to Ireland on a mission of friendship and trade. He fell in love with Isolde, but her half-uncle, King Abaddon, who married Isolde's mother and adopted Isolde after her father's death, was against her marrying the Orkney prince. Instead, Isolde was betrothed to Cormagan, a second cousin, whom she eventually married. However, Tristan returned to Ireland a year later, and Isolde stole away with him for 4 years. She bore Tristan a son, but then became homesick for Ireland. At her insistence, Tristan brought her back to her kingdom. Isolde had hoped in her heart that her half-uncle would forgive her and annul her marriage to Cormagan, who had raped her on their wedding night. She planned to ask King Abaddon to then allow him to marry Tristan, the father of Millicent's son, thus far only heir. The father of Millicent's sons, the father of Millicent kings, thus far only heir. Well, I'm going to leave it at that. Such hope the princess found to be in vain. Upon her return, Tristan was imprisoned and later executed. Hearing of his death, Isolde committed suicide. In the Celtic tale, it is Tristan who kills himself. Their only child, Humboldt, was raised by Isolde's sister Regan. From Humboldt's generation, several Grail figures emerged, such as Gareth and Gawain. You know, this is going on, and I don't even know if I want to well, there's only, let's see. I think we'll just end it there. Because I want to get over to the Anti-Grail family. And this is very short, and then we're going to end this whole part 6. You know, I'm reading this for the first time since a long time ago, and I don't know that I would have shared so much of this particular part with you, probably falling asleep. But, you know, it has undercurrents of understanding how these genetic relationships work and are still working to some extent. And then they were more consciously in effect. And that was a time when there was a lot of activity in the hive. I mean, the queen bee was really having to be restored, you know, and now not so much so. Now we're on the path of understanding why the queen bee was restored and finding where the compartments are in the secret chambers of this whole hive so that we can bring them out and secrete the sacred honey that has been building for us, that has been created through eons of time, and bring that honey forth into the light, the nectar, so that we can revivify our entire planet and break free the mold of that the blood path hold has on us, and begin to insert more and more of the white stone doctrine within it. Not doctrine. Let's take away the word doctrine, because it has a sort of a bad reputation these days, and say that the presence of the white stone before us. And so that ends my little discourse on the lineages. And believe me, there was a lot more that I skipped. But I do want to bring forth now about the Anti-Grail family. And it's so short, I'm tacking it onto this part B, because it's a very short part, but it's an important part. As this is an article on the Grail, we feel it important to acknowledge the presence of a darker element which exists solely to attempt usurpation of the divinity within the Grail principles for its own subservice agenda. We hope that perhaps by casting a light of truth upon its origins, nature, and purpose, that a transforming light can be brought to bear upon its threshold of darkness. We herein state, however, that it is best not to spend too much time contemplating these dark forces or their agendas, as whatever you place your focus of attention upon in that manner will gain energy and even possibly find a way of winding its thread into your own energy bodies. Simply focus the higher Christic Metatronic light upon these lesser vibrations and leave the rest up to the masters, luminaries, angelics, and other emissaries of divine light. That said, we impart the following. The original forebearer of the Anti-Grail family was Samael, one of the body forms created by Lucifer for his incarnation in an attempt to duplicate the Adam Kadmon template. However, he could not sustain himself through these forms, and thus they were abandoned. Even so, Samael took his mate, a woman from among the house of light named Alabedula, and thereby introduced a branch of his kind among the families of earth. While the Anti-Grail family has its beginnings, which go further back in time than does the Grail family, it is far smaller, containing fewer subfamilies or branches. The Anti-Grail family is composed of a select number of souls which enter the same genetic lineages repeatedly. These incarnations have difficulty sustaining their genetic form, as those vibrational properties of the Luciferic being which abide in their DNA cause cellular aberrations carried forth from the original intrusion made by the Luciferic force into the Adam Kadmon template via Samael's mate Abedula. Abedula. Sorry, I'm going to get into a giggling fit here. Okay. This intrusion created an isolated subtemplate that is an island unto itself. At a certain point in time, the Archangel Michael sealed it away from the greater Adam Kadmon, and thus can only perpetuate itself now among its own kind. That was a smart move on Michael's part. Because this distorted template was created outside the principles of divine law, and yet by an archangelic being, Lucifer, this Luciferic genetic subtemplate contains many serious inherent flaws. Adolf Hitler's bodily deformities attest to this. Among the inherited aberrations within the Anti-Grail family is very often the trait of impotence and sterility. Now, I need to pause for a moment because I have been told by Thoth since that time that certain members of the Anti-Grail family are still marrying Grail Bearer Light personages, unbeknownst to the Grail Bearer Light personages. So I'm going back and seeing that they can only breed within their own kind. So I'm going to pause for a Thothic moment and ask Thoth. There seems to be a contradiction here, and I'd like to ask him about that. So I'm going to put on pause, and then I'll be right back. Okay, I got the answer. You see what the key is in this line. Michael sealed it away from the greater Adam Kadmon, and thus it can only perpetuate itself now among its own kind. This is talking about the actual template. Our template can no longer be violated by that energy, further violated. So, but people who are descendants from the Anti-Grail family, and this is a very watered-down version compared to what they were, can continue to, have conceive with people that aren't in their Anti-Grail lineage and even in the True Grail lineage. And there can be offspring from it. But the key is that the template itself is not changed. So it is very difficult for a child of a Grail and Anti-Grail couple to carry on with the frequency of the Anti-Grail. Why do they do it then? Because they keep trying. They keep thinking it's going to work. And in some rare instances, it has worked, in the sense that they can manipulate, they're more easily manipulated if they have some Anti-Grail bloodline there, still in them. In fact, if the truth be known, all of us have some Anti-Grail energies there, even if they're extremely diluted. So this is a matter of degrees, but it doesn't affect that lineage. Because what I was thinking of was the fact that, if you follow the Thoth streaming here, Thoth has stated that Princess Diana was the incarnation of Guinevere. Now, was Guinevere layered being? He's never said. Was she one of the souls? I'm not sure how that goes, so I'm not going to get into it deeply, but let's just say Princess Diana was Guinevere. And look what happened to her, which was no accident. And she married and bore two children from the Anti-Grail lineage. But these two children are very beautiful light beings. You don't pay any attention to all the, mainstream stuff. They're not perfect. They're human beings, but they have that light stream in them, and they're abiding by it for the most part. And so, they're not going to be controlled by the Anti-Grail family. So this shows you how this works out in any case. So I will continue here. These origins of the Anti-Grail family took place in what is now known as Germany, but there also were and still are branches in Italy, Portugal, and Turkey. The central family name, there are many branch names, is Anhiel, A-N-H-I-E-L, although this is not used by family members in the world at present. The host for the Antichrist is now, as of 1998, 23 years of age. His birthplace was Istanbul, Turkey, but he is not a legal citizen of any country. His family, which includes the Order of Gethsemane, keeps him anonymous to the world. He is not yet received by any antichristic force field. As it now stands, the plan for his initiation will begin in the year 2010. Now, I have not heard a peep out of Thoth about this person since I wrote this in 1998. And I'm not going to go off on that now. It would be a new channeling and whatever. But that's where it stands. The Order of Gethsemane, an obvious perversion of the sacred Order of Zane, is comprised of those who first conceal, then eventually reveal the host for the Antichrist. They also make the way for his future anointing by prompting and perpetuating specific world events that lead humanity ever closer to open the door of the beast. And I believe that's what we call nowadays false flags, like 9/11, like the recent Orlando. That doesn't mean that people aren't killed. False flags are not only orchestrated where nobody gets hurt. Mostly people do get hurt, unfortunately. When examining the regime of the most recently empowered Antichrist in the form of Adolf Hitler, we can easily see the stark distortions of the true concept of blood consciousness evident in the horrible agenda of Hitler's anti-Grail lineage. The original intent of the Grail family spawned by Melchizedek was to perpetuate illumined God consciousness throughout all of humanity. This was never intended to be accomplished by genetic breeding alone. Certainly there were the advanced guard Grail families who contained the actual genetic consciousness of the Christic blood element, but their purpose was to generate and perpetuate world awareness of the Christic presence in the body, mind, soul of every incarnate human being. Again, we're not talking about religions here, not Christian religion. We're talking about no religion. We're talking about Christic presence, consciousness, universal Christic archangelic beingness. Through the works of these advanced guard families, it was hoped that the vibration of the pure Grail light blood would penetrate into all genetic strains by the means of paragenetic assimilation. The science and principles of paragenetics incorporate the creation of etheric DNA links through the process of reincarnation via the transport of the soul from one genetic body form to another. This is a principle whereby an incarnated individual can attempt to redeem a fallen branch of specific genetic vine by the introduction of their soul's paragenetic links carried from past incarnational sojourns in other more relatively pure bloodlines. In addition, these paragenetic principles also incorporate the soul's sunoma, or the ancient bloodline consciousness which originates in the star of origin. Thus, the soul incarnate is always offered the potential to not only further the evolution of their stellar bloodline, but also introduce those paragenetic frequencies into the physical genetic bloodline they are incarnate within. Thus, the original Grail family was in essence the first Grail seed sown in the earth. Yet through pollination by the bees and butterflies, souls continually incarnating in various different genetic lineages, all plants or races of humanity would benefit from the growth and development of the original seedlings through these paragenetic links. Thus we have both the generational blood path principle and the higher white stone insertion taking place simultaneously for the benefit of all souls and genetic lineages on the earth. Oh my goodness, it looks like my avatar's mouth is stuck wide open. Oh well. So we'll go to a prettier picture here. The Nazi ideology embraced the belief in blood consciousness, but took it to a very physical and godless sense to mean the extermination of whole races of people in order to create the perfected race. Intent on weeding out the garden, they were blind to the beauty of all nature which surrounded them. These very weeds were the sacred herbal life of future development in consciousness. Thoth informs us that Hitler and some of his occult cronies were obsessed with obtaining the physical Grail and created a scientific venture in an attempt to return through time to locate it. They were not successful in retrieving the cup of Christ. However, Hitler did manage to obtain the sacred spear of Longinus, which pierced Yeshua's side as an act of compassion while he hung upon the cross. He did not travel back in time to do this, but invaded Austria instead. The spear was housed within the treasure house in the Hofburg in Vienna. And we also know historically that, all of Hitler's cronies had this big castle they had, you know, and they fixed it up all like Grail legends and everything. So they were very much into all of that because they felt they could retrieve it magically. They were not interested in retrieving it spiritually. And so this concludes part B of part 6. And we will go on with at least 1 or 2 more of these grails before we finish our whole series. Thank you for listening and patience with me in all the little faux pas that happen when I create these. But, you know, I do feel that nonetheless the transference of energies is present, or I wouldn't be doing them. So love to you all. Until the next Grail insertion.